further delay, it's time to kick off. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talk to a British Guy.
Yes, it sure is. And put it together for our first British guy, the great Aidan Pickering, everyone. Come on.
Hey.
Aidan.
Hey, Mark. Wow, what an intro. I had no idea.
Yes, nor did I, really. I knew that he cut something for us, and it's quite grand. There is a quality of, particularly this British royalty thing, that has a grandeur and ceremony that, honestly, I think we might pretend that we don't like it on some level, but it's a show. It's costumes, it's music, it's marches. Tell me your thoughts about all of this pomp and circumstance.
Do you know one of the things that is a lesser known about all that pageantry? Everybody assumes it all dates back to 1,000 years. Well, a little bit of it does, but most of it was invented by Queen Victoria and Albert in the late 19th century because they wanted to make the royals more relevant and bigger and more enjoyable by the public. So they went out and they bought homes, Balmoral, Sandringham, all these big castles and palaces, and they built gold coaches. And basically, a lot of the stuff that you're going to see at this coronation coming up is based on Queen Victoria's image and view of the royal family.
That's wild. I had no idea. You're absolutely right. I just presumed it was the legacy of centuries, you know?
I mean, there are some bits and pieces that are centuries old, and the main one is that crown, which, by the way, weighs 5 pounds. So take 2 large bags of sugar, stick them on your head, see how long you can hold them there before you get a neck ache. That's what Charles is going to do, and of course, his mother did the same thing 70 years ago. That thing dates back to the 17th century, but in the 17th century, Edward melted it down from 1,000 years ago. So that thing's like a recycled, upcycled 1,000-year-old crown.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
We have processes and protocols and standards.
Right. So Aidan, your personal life actually is really interesting, though, because your dad was, you're a journalist yourself. I mean, your dad was very much in the world of journalism and publishing. I wonder if you could just speak and then explain how that might connect the dots for us, please.
Well, sure. I mean, my dad became a journalist at the age of 17 and was still working up to when he passed away at the age of 91. He was not just a journalist, but a newspaper manager. He was an editor of the Daily Express, which in the 50s was the biggest circulation newspaper in Britain. And then he became executive vice chairman of the Times newspaper, which brought him very much into contact with Rupert Murdoch and the Rupert Murdoch empire. And, you know, he was one of those interesting people, I think, who had journalistic allegiances, but he was fond of the royal family. And was something of a friend to the royal family in their times of need, when particularly I think in the 1980s and 90s they were really being hammered by the tabloid press. And of course we've learned a lot about that period now, that the newspapers were engaging in serious illegal conduct in order to get those stories. This is kind of the interesting thing to me with seeing so much of Charles and Camilla and the royals back in the news in this way. They've got their own set of problems. Their house is not exactly a calm one with all that's going on with Harry and all the rest of it. But, you know, in amongst all of that, there's a bit of a distaste, I think, for some of the coverage that they've had to endure. And so I think the British people are a little bit stuck in the middle of like, well, you know what? We have this royal family. Maybe, like they used to say of the BBC license fee, it's indefensible but irreplaceable. And there may be something to that. What would you have in Britain if you didn't have the royal family? Of course, you could have a republic if you want, but who are you going to put on the banknotes? What's going to happen to those castles? They just become Disneyland in London. they do bring in a certain amount of, foreign exchange from tourists, but also they bring a certain amount of prestige, and everybody knows them. So I've really come to the view that everybody has their criticisms, and people don't want to spend all this money, and sometimes it seems like it's too much. But you wouldn't, I don't think most people would want a Britain with a royal family as opposed to not having one. They just may not want to pay.
Is the royal family self-sustaining? In other words, well, I guess I don't see how they would be. I have to ask the question anyway. Where does the money come that supports them? I guess might be the way to put it.
Well, they get an amount of taxpayer dollars, pounds, I should say. But the thing that people forget is that the crown, Charles, now essentially is one of the wealthiest landowners in Britain, and one of the richest men in Britain.
So if he wanted to sell one of those pieces of real estate that the crown owns, could he do that?
I don't think he would. I think technically he can, but I can't.
Could he borrow against it?
Well, they've actually get huge rents from farmlands. They own whole villages. They even put up wind farms on crown land and got the revenue from that. So when the bill comes around, the taxpayer of £100 million, $120 million, people do say, well, couldn't you, work those farms a little more, raise your rents? Couldn't you pay for it yourselves? Maybe sell a little jewelry to pay for it. And so it's an ongoing debate. But I'd tell you something, Mark. The coronation is a sort of one day, and everybody will all do their thing, and there'll be some criticism, and there'll be lots of patriotism and flag waving. But Charles's job is cut out for him right now. It's really about sort of saving the monarchy. Queen Elizabeth did a pretty remarkable job over her reign, 70 years of making a royal family that didn't fall apart despite the pressures, and it was pretty close at times. And their polls are not good, probably worse than Joe Biden's. They struggle. And Charles,
and that's because of the anachronistic quality that they just feel like from a different time, or is it because of the specific personalities of the royals and their behavior or something?
Well, they do stuff that look at Harry's book. I mean, it became a bestseller. It lifted the lid on some pretty odious stuff that goes on. Some very dubious comments, things that people said, attitudes, and people will give them a chance, but they struggle as an institution because, like any family, they're made up of component parts, and not everybody is as likable as say the Queen. So Charles has got his work cut out. I mean, he's shown himself to be a champion, actually, of inclusivity. He has even, if you believe it or not, lent his support to research into the crown's relationship with the slave trade, going back into the 18th century and before, and 19th century. And it's pretty extraordinary. He might not like what they find, but there is a shift, I think, with Charles to try to be, to really reflect all of the UK. It's very the pluralistic society that you have there, and they're trying to do that at the coronation. But the coronation is sort of the distraction. Really, it's sure. Everything going ahead of like, can he keep this ship afloat?
It's interesting that you point to him in ways that would suggest that he does have a shot at keeping that ship afloat. Because the other thing that I've learned about him, just in our discussions with those who are connected to that world a bit more than we might be, or certainly than I am, is that his wish list, his agenda from a public policy standpoint is really laudable. I mean, he's, as you suggested, kind of on the forefront of alternative energy. He has embraced the the realities about the British crown throughout history, as you've also alluded to. So he seems as though, because this flies in the face, and now I will get to Camilla because this is Kim's thing. This flies in the face of the image and reputation that perhaps he has as a result of having been unfaithful to one of the most beloved, I assume, in modern times, Britishers, Diana, right? So I wonder if you can help, square that circle and also speak to this Camilla thing that Kim will ask more about that.
Well, first of all, he was ahead of his time. He was roundly criticized for years, Charles, for his stance on the environment, for his stance on architecture. He said that cities were being put up with these soulless buildings, concrete jungles, and it was having an effect on the youth. Well, that seems pretty normal today. I think we all kind of accept that. But Charles said it, stuck his neck out in the 70s and 80s, and people said, "Oh, he's a tree-hugging loony bin." And I would say times proved him right. And there are quite a number of stances that he's taken. Central planning of small towns, for example, to maximize the health and well-being of the people that live there. Transportation issues. He's really been quite a forward-thinking individual. Camilla, it is what it is. Diana died a long time ago. The British people have had quite a long time now to get to grips with Camilla as the Queen Consort. I don't think she is supremely popular. The polls suggest that she is certainly not super popular, but at the same time, she comes in a package deal. And so I suppose if you accept Charles, you accept Camilla. And, it's a question of, can you put behind you the stuff that happened with Diana? And I know a lot of people can't.
Right. Here it is, Liz says Diana died a long time ago, but we haven't forgotten what happened to her. Yeah, it's a weird thing that Americans can't quite choke that down. I say Americans, I assume Britishers as well. But so regardless of how righteous this guy might be, this is a part of his history as well. Yeah. And what is the mood in as you hear in Britain? Is there, when it comes to Camilla, have they digested her now in the way you suggested enough time has passed?
Well, I think some have, some haven't. I think that people are going to essentially have to get used to her. She's taken, this title, Queen Consort. I think people will always think of Charles as their king first off. But you know what? The more these people go around and they do their good works, and if they can actually establish themselves as people who care and move social issues forward. I mean, there's this thing called the Prince's Trust, for example. It's done really remarkable work for inner cities. And a lot of it's done without the fanfare. Some of it, sometimes there's a big concert and people talk about it. But the work of those charities continues. It seems to me if she can be a part of that and part of the movement in Britain, she'll never silence all of her detractors, but she'll... I think slowly, it's like a long game. These royals tend to live a long time because they have good healthcare and so forth. Nice palaces with plenty of central heating. So, Charles could be on the throne 20 years or more. It's a long-term game, and it's all about the stuff that they achieve as king and queen consort.
Natalie writes, the older I get, the more I realize that Diana, Charles, and Camilla were all victims of the system that pressured Charles to marry Diana instead of Camilla initially.
I think it's very astute. Harry's book really shows what the institution of the monarchy is and can do to people. And in some ways, he was a minor player because the chances of him taking the throne now are zero and were always slim. But for Diana, what she went up against. And nobody really knew what she was up against. I think people now know. But at the time, I think it was devastating. And I think a lot of people rightly just are not going to move on from that. Some will. And by the way, I don't know how the Crown television show has helped or hindered. Some of it may be a little fanciful and fictitious, but some of it, but as many things do, it's sort of become the document of historical record. Rehashing all the Camilla Gate and all those interesting things that they said to each other on that recorded phone call brings back some memories, I think, that people are not going to forget about in any time soon. And so it's not it's not an easy playing field to move forward on.
When did the rule change that you could be a divorcee and be a king or a queen?
Well, I think it changed with Camilla. And I think that...
Well, and Charles, right? Because he was technically divorced from Diana.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it changed during the course of him being Prince of Wales, waiting to become king. And there was this question mark, I think, of, would they be able to accept it? And I think eventually the church embraced it. Enough people said, we don't have a problem with it. The Queen embraced the idea. They were seen in public together. It was clear to the British people that this was going to be their future queen. And it changed. But I mean, think of the difference between this and Edward and Mrs. Simpson, where, the British press didn't even report what was happening, that their own king was going to abdicate because he wanted to be with a divorcee. I mean, I know it was a long time ago, but that was always the question mark. It was the precedent for this marriage and for this monarchy was, I assume we've all moved on and people understand and accept divorce far, far more than they ever did back then. But at the same time, Charles is the head of the Church of England. And so those diehards in the Church of England who really believe in marriage for life and not getting remarried to a divorcee and that disqualifying you from being a king, that was the hurdle that they've had to get over. But they've got over it.
No, I mean, as you say, it was a long time ago. Just to quickly make the point, though, but it wasn't that long. I mean, there are people still alive who it's in a lifetime that all happened, right? So they pivoted, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in something of a short order, to accommodate the new,
It's interesting that it's a long time ago, but my mom and dad, somehow the conversation frequently went back to Edward and Mrs. Simpson. It was a kind of a JFK moment. It was something that happened in the British psyche that really uprooted and made people think about, well, what actually do I think about marriage and divorce? And, it was a big, big deal.
And as you suggest, the Church of England's involved. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has been revised and evolves to a different place that's kind of wrapped up in all of this. You've been to Buckingham Palace, have you not, Aidan Pickering?
I went to Buckingham Palace because my father was knighted by the Queen for services.
Yes, he was, and that's what I was getting at. Yes, indeed.
That's cool.
I think I was 12 years old. I have two older siblings. They only allowed two siblings in to the room where they get the sword out, and the Queen gets the sword out and does the thing with the sword to knight her subject. So I was not allowed in. So I went to the bathrooms and filled up my pockets with the Buckingham Palace soap, and
I love it.
And made a tidy profit on the school playground.
Oh, you resold the soap, did you?
Well, I might have made a couple of pounds for my trouble, but I felt very miffed that I was not able to be in the ceremony itself. So
yeah. Well,
there's never been anything like this.
Exactly, an entrepreneurial. So I was at the White House once for the Kennedy Center Honors, and I had the same thought that you had as a 12-year-old. And that thought was there were these like hand towels in the bathroom, and they had the White House crest on them.
Mark, they got low jacks in them. Don't do it.
I'm glad I didn't take any. I did not.
No. There'll be a knock on the
Well,
door.
uh, the state of the state in Britain, as you see it now. I mean, the truth is that the royals have, while they're a curiosity and will take center stage, politically the power has, it's shifted, right? I mean, it's now, it's to Parliament. Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to British policy, I guess when you look at Brexit, you look at the economics of the British system now and how they interlock both with us, but more to the point with the European Union. I wonder if you can just give us a second on that.
Britain's going through tough economic times. There is a real cost of living, standard of living crisis. People can't pay their bills. Fuel is extraordinarily high priced, both for heating and for driving cars and so forth. It's tough, and so while this coronation will be a nice distraction, the British government's got a lot on its plate. There's a lot going on in Europe. Brexit has happened. They're trying to kind of deal with the fallout of Brexit. There's still question marks over for example, the border in Ireland and what you do with goods and services that come and go. There's a war going on that's really not so very far away, and it's affecting all of Europe. And Britain is involved, in giving support to Ukraine. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I think there's a lot of there may be hopes for the future and so forth, but I mean, there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of people who will love the distraction, but they want answers from their government to say, okay, so what do we do? I mean, the Liz Truss debacle showed that, you got to watch the economic policies that you institute. Whatever.
Well, she came in with a heavy hand for sure. Huh?
She certainly did. She certainly did, and spooked the markets. Well, you know what? Markets are volatile, and they got a lot of work to do, and you sort of take these moments of pageantry as a rest stop, but they'll soon be back on the freeway.
This is something that I wanted to touch on with you anyway in our last minute with Aidan Pickering, as we spend this ramp up to coronation each day talking to a British guy. This may be the guy with a great perspective. What does Aidan, having been to Buckingham Palace and father was knighted, Liz asks, what does Aidan think of asking the public to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the King?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. It's really extraordinary. And the reason is we do the Pledge of Allegiance here all the time and nobody cares. Well, you don't do that in England. And I tell you why. Britons, and actually Europeans in general, are very nervous about displays of patriotism, nationalism, flag waving, or anything else. And the answer to that lies in what happened in the 1940s with the Second World War. They just don't do it except on, big occasions. So the idea that you would be asked to say a pledge, it's a bit weird. I mean, I suppose if you want to join in, it's voluntary. It's not compulsory. But it does raise the question, well, what if you don't join in? Are you going to get lynched by a mob? I don't know. Look at what happened when Charles came to the throne. It was announced that Charles was the king after Queen Elizabeth II's death. There was a couple of protesters. You remember this? There was one lawyer held up a blank sign outside the Houses of Parliament and was arrested. A blank sign. And then there was another guy in Oxford who shouted, who elected you? Because they were saying, God save the king, God save the king. They said, who elected you? He said, and he was arrested and charged with a crime. So, I mean, do the pledge if you want, fine, whatever. But it's definitely odd. And I think it sits strangely with quite a number of Britons who are a little bit puzzled by it because it's just not something they do. And it, I think, makes some people nervous. And I know there'll be quite a number of people who say, oh, I'm not saying that. I'll watch it on TV and I'll raise my glass to the new king, but I'm not saying that.
Yeah, it is odd. I mean, I think you're right. It's so much a part of our life here as kids. You say, you learn that right away. and then it sort of washes over you. You don't even pay attention to what it really is, you know. But to a specific person, a pledge is sort of a, but you know, it's I don't know.
And that's a good point. It's, you know, here you're pledging allegiance to a flag and to a country and to a democratic ideal. There, it's an individual. Well, Britain's not defined by King Charles. I got news for you.
Yeah.
So what is that allegiance to? And if he goes the direction you don't want, can you withdraw your allegiance? I doubt it. Can you ask for a recount? I doubt it. So I don't know. I would
It's
you know
there,
what you
though.
do? You just mumble, you mouth the words without saying them. That way you've got an out.
That's what I would tell my kids. Don't worry about
decide that it's gone south.
Sure. You don't want to be the one kid in class who makes an issue out of it or whatever. Aidan, you know, I adore you. It's great to have you on the show. This is your first time. I hope you'll be a visitor again. You can weigh in on so many things, but I love that the roots of your life actually go back into this world that was connected to the crown.
It's such a pleasure. It's a pleasure to talk about this stuff. And
really enjoyed it. Our first, and you were our inaugural guest on Talk to a British Guy. So thank you. Aidan Pickering. Love it. Thanks, Aidan.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Right.
this is Talk to a British Guy.
I thought it went very well. Albert. Nicely done. Aidan is, he's the real
we
thing.
could just roll that music the rest of the show and call it a day.
Albert, thank you.
Well done. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.